Hello, I'm Melanie Lewis, and I am the Deputy Director of Community Libraries here at the Rochester Public Library. And I was invited by the Friends and Foundation of the Rochester Public Library to review The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. I will try not to give away too many spoilers in this review. I'm not sure how many of you actually read the book, but I'll do my best with that. The Vanishing Half is Bennett's second novel, released in 2020. Her first novel, The Mothers, was a New York Times bestseller when it was released in 2016. The Vanishing Half was also a New York Times bestseller list book and recommendation in 2020. The Vanishing Half is a Good Morning America book club selection and also managed to land itself on Barack Obama's top titles for 2020. This novel tells the story of the Vane sisters, Stella and Desiree, who are twins. They grow up in rural Louisiana in a small town in the era of Jim Crow and racial terror. As teenagers, they decide to run away from the town, run away from their mother, um, run away from their community, um, leaving their mother alone in the town, but feeling like life in the town offers them no hope, no future, um, and was just too oppressive. This town of Mallard is not just an ordinary town. All of the residents of the town are light skinned blacks. For the most part, descendants of the formerly enslaved and the former slaveholders. To keep the town's population light, residents basically married each other or they chose light skinned partners from surrounding communities. This proximity to being white was a source of pride for its residents. Unfortunately, along with this pride came feelings of superiority over darker skinned blacks. This was a compelling plot line. It worked for the book. I'm not a geneticist. I don't have a degree in biology. I'm not sure if that would work in real life. I think somebody will come out dark or darker. Anyhow, the sisters do manage to escape Mallard. They run away and arrive in New Orleans, a big city, different economy, different culture, and the girls struggle. They struggle to work, they struggle to live, um, they struggle financially and emotionally, but they depend on each other. Stella, who's the more fragile and quiet twin, in her childhood and her life in Mallard, maybe experimented with passing for white once in a while to do something small but privileged, like go to a museum or maybe not have to wait in a line or go into a store and look at a dress. Finding herself in need of stable employment, decent employment, employment that wasn't grueling, like domestic work, like agricultural work, um, Stella decides to pass for white in order to secure a good paying, secure clerical job. She begins with this passing life, only passing, during her work hours and at her workplace in downtown near her workplace. However, she's noticing how easier and freer her life is as a white woman than as a black one. She then decides not to just pass in the workplace and during work hours, but completely pass into white society, essentially becoming a white woman in order to secure the kind of freedom that she feels when she is white Stella in the workplace. However, she soon finds that this freedom is not free. Um, she has to separate herself from her former life, her family, her hometown of Mallard, and of course, her twin sister, because that's how passing works. You have to completely separate yourself from your blackness. Britt Bennett uses these words to describe this process. There was nothing to being white except boldness. You could convince anyone you belonged somewhere if you acted like it. The hardest part about becoming someone else is deciding to do it. Later on in the book, it's a little bit of a spoiler, but I'll tell it. When the sisters are reunited, the one sister says, "How did you do this? How did you turn yourself into a white person?" And one of the things that she said is, "I watched a lot of television." Anyhow, Desiree, the other sister, who could have passed for white as well, is searching for freedom from her life in Mallard and the culture of Mallard in a different way. She meets and marries a very dark man and has a dark child named Jude. Not giving away more of the plot, she ends up having to return home to Mallard with Jude in tow, making Jude the only dark person living in the whole town. The novel then bounces back and forth in decades, following the lives and legacies of the two sisters and the results of their choices. The choice of Stella to pass as white, and the choice of Desiree to return to a light skinned town with a dark skinned child. The Vanishing Half is as much about finding identity as it is about finding freedom and feeling free. These identity issues are through most of the characters, but especially the daughters of the twins, Kennedy and Jude. Jude, again, is the dark skinned daughter of Desiree, and Kennedy is Stella's blonde haired daughter who believes she is white. Jude grows up with self esteem issues and the feelings of not belonging as a result of growing up dark and therefore ugly in the town of Mallard. However, she's bright and ambitious, seeks her freedom, moves west to attend college, and enters into a loving and supportive relationship with Reese, who is seeking a freedom and identity of his own, and is a complicated character in the book as well. Kennedy, who is Stella's daughter, is privileged but lost. She knows intrinsically that something in her life is missing. She's not aware of her mother's racial background. She's not aware of Mallard. She makes some bold moves in her own life, again, searching for freedom and identity. Stella's character, however, is the most interesting to me. Complicated, a clear example of self loathing and identifying with the oppressor, internalizing racism and racist ideas, even though this town of Mallard prided themselves as appearing white and being in proximity to whiteness. Whites considered it a colored town and did not spare any oppression or violence. Stella is a victim and witness to lots of horrific things, all of the horrors of growing up in that time. But however, she still falls victim of the supremacy and decides to transition into the world of whiteness, oftentimes participating in the oppression. The Vanishing Half was a great read. There was a small element of suspense in it after Jude and Kennedy were introduced. You want to know what's going to happen. How is it going to happen? When is it going to happen? What are they going to do? Became a page turner at that part of the book, during that portion of the book. There are many great and beautifully written passages and quotes. I started to mark them up for the purposes of this review, but then there just became too many. So there were many times where I would read a passage and just maybe sit back and let it marinate, or read a sentence over and over again. Britt Bennett has a way of summing up situations, conversations, scenes in a few words at the end of paragraphs. This book is not just about passing or racism, even though it is, but it also does a very good job through the plot and through the character development of examining issues of gender identity, gender roles, classism, what is a traditional relationship. It does a lot. Most importantly, it was entertaining. The writing was fluid. Um, I had a couple of times I got confused because it goes back and forth in decades, but it's not linear. So I had to say, wait a minute, where am I here? And go back to the beginning of the section to find out what decade I was in. But for the most part, it was a great read, and I would highly recommend reading The Vanishing Half. If you enjoy The Vanishing Half, there are many books, many, with the themes of passing and colorism in the plot. Off the top of my head, I would think of The Bluest Eye, Toni Morrison, colorism, so many. All you have to do is use your Google and you'll find them. But I have a few recommendations here for you. The first is a Harlem Renaissance classic book called Passing by Nella Larsen. This is my copy, so it's two of her books in one, called Quicksand and Passing. But this is Passing, and it takes place in the 20s, and it's similar to The Vanishing Half in that it follows two young girls, except these are childhood friends and not sisters. And in young adulthood, they decide to separate and go different ways, take different paths. One decides she needs to pass for white in order to have the life that she wants to live, and the other stays in Harlem and lives a very black life. This book is on my list to reread because it was recently made into a movie. I think it's with Tessa Thompson. It was just at Sundance. I don't know when it's going to be released because of COVID. It may go straight to streaming, but my memory of it, of the details, is kind of fuzzy. But I remember really liking reading this book. Again, Harlem Renaissance writer Nella Larsen, Passing. The next book that I have is also by a Harlem Renaissance writer, but it was written later in her life. I think she might have even been in her 80s when she wrote it. It's Dorothy West, and it's The Wedding. And similar to The Vanishing Half, there's a community of black folks who I believe yes, it's Martha's Vineyard. They vacation each year in Martha's Vineyard and create a community for themselves. It takes place later in the 50s. It's still segregated, but this community is very wealthy, very educated, um, but for the most part, very light skinned. So there's a lot of colorism in the book, a lot of classism in the book, a lot of internalized racism in the book. However, in the book, there are some characters who decide they want to do things a little bit differently, and times are changing. And it takes place um, the weekend of a wedding in Martha's Vineyard. This book was also made into a movie. I remember seeing the movie years ago and thinking, that wasn't, they changed the plot. That happens a lot with movies. Um, and thought the book was much better. The plot lines in the book was much better. But Dorothy West, The Wedding, another book about colorism and communities of light-skinned blacks. The next book that I have is Caucasia by Danzy Senna. And Danzy Senna is a light-skinned um, African American who often gets mistaken for being white, and she writes a lot about that experience. She wrote this book, Caucasia. It's been a while now. It's probably about 20 years. And like The Vanishing Half, sisters, not twins, but sisters. Um, one is lighter, one is darker, so it differs from The Vanishing Half in that way. But not giving any spoilers, some events happen in the book, and they have to separate and go their separate ways and assume other identities for their safety. And the book follows the experience of the one who chooses to pass for white. Um, she doesn't have much of a choice, but she needs to do this in order to be safe. And one who goes into a very, very black life. And it follows their separation. They were very close, um, very, very close, growing before they separated, and it shows the differences. If I remember correctly, they were not twins, but I might be wrong. But Caucasia is another book. Just for the heck of it, I threw in another book um, called Dark Girls by Bill Duke. And to combat all this colorism, I thought, hey, I pulled this off my shelf and thought I'd take a look at the book. But basically, it's a book with these beautiful pictures of African American women, black women, who have a short narrative about what it's like um, to be dark in a society that maybe that's not the beauty standard. Some of these women are Hollywood actresses, some of them are not, but they all like to tell their story. And it's Bill Duke, who's a writer and producer. Dark Girls. That is all I have for you. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach out to me at my library email at Melanie, MELANIE, .Lewis at libraryweb.org. Lewis is spelled LEWIS. Have any questions or comments about The Vanishing Half? If you have any comments about my comments about The Vanishing Half, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you for having me.